Hi, I'm Adam and welcome once again to South Wales Ghost Watch. And on my show we've got regular guest Martin here with me.
Hi.
And today we're going to be talking about trolls and fairies. Now, from what I understand, trolls come from Norse mythology, is that right, Martin?
Yeah. Yes. You have to think of Norse mythology in terms of quite savage, vicious times, battles between nature and humans. And also the Norse gods weren't particularly nice characters. They were very brave and very heroic, but they were flawed against the giants. And the trolls are, if you like, a race of beings that could be called elementals, I suppose, who are misshapen, who are a threat to the world of humans, the world of men, and are characters that are traditionally seen as scavengers on society. I remember in series 2 of Merlin, which was on some years ago, the king Uther Pendragon was bewitched by a troll into thinking that the troll was a beautiful woman. And a troll is a character that is very animal, very cunning, very threatening. An animal that lives under bridges, in hidden places, lives singly, and is fond of gold and rotting food and things like that.
Okay, they're also very isolated creatures. Where are they found, trolls?
Well, they were a traditional creature of Scandinavian myth. If you think of, it's always trolls who live under bridges in remote areas and rob, steal and pillage. They're living under bridges because they're perceived as gold, goods, food are constantly being moved about. And the troll, who is essentially a scavenger or a threat, will live under that bridge and will also threaten people because they're misshapen. They are, if you like, an aspect of the human greed, misshapen, ugly, that perhaps we deny our more ugly aspects. And often people who were disabled, who were scarred, who were deformed, may also have contributed to the troll legend. So, the film The Elephant Man has certain troll-like features where they talk about the deformity. Once more, we talked about werewolves and vampires,
Yes.
who were different, and vampires were undead because they weren't alive or dead. Werewolves were humans that turned into to animals, turned into wolves, and trolls are very misshapen humans who appear like that and are distorted, wounded, disabled, who have tusks, who look pig-like,
Yes.
And just as...
And they're a lot bigger than humans as
well.
well.
And a lot bigger than humans. And just as we talked about last week, that the dog was a creature that was domesticated, and I suggested that possibly the fear of the dog turning savage was like an aspect of the fear of the animal within. It may be that some people have suggested that the origin of the troll it originates from the domestication of the pig, and that the pig is an animal that we fed our scraps to, that lived on the edge of rural society, and that much as we fear a creature that turns from a human into animal, there is a creature out there that looks human but is also pig-like.
Okay.
So in the 1970s, when I was a long-haired student radical, we used to shout nice words to do with that at the policeman. And it's interesting that our terms of abuse are dog, pig, yeah, anything that lives on the outside. So the troll is a creature. We use the word now for people who troll accounts on Facebook. Yeah, and to the person who wrote nasty things to me on Facebook today, yes, you are a real troll. But it's used as a term of abuse.
Yeah,
Somebody who takes over something and uses things.
Yeah, like dog, pig,
it's a term of abuse. So mythology is often a way of explaining how we define our edges. A troll is a character that it lives on the outskirts. It depends on humans to rob the gold and so on. And in the plays of Heinrich Ibsen, who wrote lots of plays in the 19th century, the play Peer Gynt is about trolls. And trolls are characters that are vicious, greedy, a bit like human beings.
And they have no morals as well.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Yeah, okay. Are trolls dangerous to most people then? I suppose they are.
Well, I suppose they are. Last night I was at a philosophy society meeting, and we were talking about people who are seen as threats and greedy, and one of the characters decided that we should put to death all politicians and bankers. Perhaps the idea of a greedy creature, perhaps the idea of the troll is the idea of the robber, the creature that lives as well in the woods, that is soiled and dirty. Yeah. So there may be an aspect of that there. They are also explain why strange deaths occur at certain times.
Okay, so are trolls able to learn, adapt, and interact with other trolls and show peaceful?
Well, according to the mythological idea of the ancient Norse, trolls were another race who chose to live alongside and cooperate with one another. They were solitary creatures, but they were just another race, like the dwarves or the dark elves, or other creatures like that.
Okay.
So they're quite a character, but they are, if you like, humans are flawed according to Norse mythology. Even the gods were, but trolls were even more flawed. Okay. So the idea behind Norse mythology were we were all pretty damaged and all pretty abusive, but some humans were better than others.
I see. And they're
better than the trolls, yes.
Oh, okay. It's my understanding that trolls have a fear of lightning due to the god Thor in Norse mythology, and his battle against these beings as well.
Yes. Yeah. Thor was the god that battled the trolls because they were representatives of the giants. They are like a lesser form of giant, and Thor often used lightning and his hammer to smite them, because Norse mythology talks about at the end of time there will be a battle called Ragnarok, at which the forces of good and the forces of evil will battle it out, and the trolls are a representative of the forces of the slightly more evil than humans. Yeah? Norse mythology doesn't have a lot of optimism in it. It's probably why I like to read it as a child, because I like that. I like the darker side of human of these legends, because when I did wrong things, it made me feel slightly better. So a fascination with the troll, with these different groups, with this battle, is essential to all mythology. The thing that is the further it gets from human, the more threatening it is. The troll has human shape, but he's more pig-like. Yeah, I remember in the Lord of the Rings, some of the orcs look distinctly pig-like. Yeah, and it's very alarming. The trolls in the Lord of the Rings are gigantic creatures.
Yes.
Yeah. And in the recent version of The Hobbit, the trolls, apart from having many suffering from flatulence, seem to want to eat human flesh or dwarf flesh all the time. So there's that threat of cannibals. But of course, let's think of it like this. What animal is slaughtered most by Norse society? The pig.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Is it because we slaughter these animals? Do we not fear perhaps at some level that they will rise up and slaughter us?
Possibly, yeah.
There was a Japanese film made some years ago in anime about this little boy who was accidentally turned into a pig, and he was nearly slaughtered in a slaughterhouse.
Oh gosh!
Yes.
It's very disturbing, isn't it?
Very disturbing, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, also the ringing of church bells would somehow cause trolls to leave a certain area of the land, wouldn't they? And
Yes,
venture
that's the
elsewhere.
idea.
It would scare them in some ways.
Trolls, accordingly, once more like vampires, yeah,
Yeah.
the church chases away the trolls. Yeah, the church bells do that. There's no crosses there that drives them away, but the idea of the church bells might have something to do with the coming of Christianity to Scandinavia.
It's a symbol of good over evil kind of things.
Or the symbol of a change of the more tribal people being driven away by a more town settled people. Yeah?
Yeah.
Christianity versus an older pagan tradition.
Okay.
Possibly.
So how do trolls survive in these places that they live in, the under bridges?
Well, the idea is that they're essentially robbers.
Yeah.
So they survive by preying on humanity. That's effectively how they survive. They are creatures who are liminal, they exist on the edges. And we always say the worst about people who live on the edges. We always complain about them. It's rather like people moan about gypsies today. Gypsies live on the edge of society. People say, oh, blah, blah, blah. Anything that lives on the outside, anybody who lives on the outside of society who doesn't behave like you and me, is obviously a threat.
So that really they're violent gypsies who have got this grotesque looking feature about them.
Well,
But
no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying is that any group of people who live on the outside of society who don't follow our rules are often seen as being a threat.
Okay.
And it may be that what the trolls were originally were people who were cast out.
Okay.
That's possible.
And they were because they were feared of. And
yes, that's right. Yes.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on to fairies now. What does a fairy actually look like? Do they have the same characteristics?
Well, let's try and look at
trolls?
where the fairy legends come from. There are some sort of idea, first of all, that the fairies are the Celts. Yeah. The fairies are people having a different outlook, a different structure, believing in a non-Christian religion, and that the fairies themselves are beings that are more nature-based, more respectful of nature, more understanding. And there are some ideas that the fairies were originally Celts.
Okay.
And what the legend talks about the fairies being pushed aside comes from the gradual conversion of the Celtic lands to Christianity and the pushing away of Celtic culture, which spread over the whole of the UK as it is now, into West Wales and into which is now Cornwall. And I'll give you an example. This morning, apparently, I was listening to a programme and it said that Welsh, what we would recognise as Welsh, was spoken in southern Scotland until about the 14th, 15th century. But you know, there's that sort of idea of pushing one culture out, and those we push out, we make more spectacular and more interesting and more magical.
Okay. So what's the connection between a changeling and a fairy?
Right. Two ways. Let's look at this culturally as well. The idea was that fairies could not conceive.
Okay.
That was the idea. So that a child swapped. A human could, in the fairyland, could impregnate, could become, so that they were encouraged. They were like big creatures. They were humans who existed in that other realm.
Right. Okay.
And it may actually refer to a time when the Celt and the Anglo-Saxon, were crossing over. Their cultures were crossing over. That people, or it could reply to the fact that the tension between more pagan older beliefs and Christian ideas.
Yeah.
That may well be part of it. The idea of a change. There was also the fear of, we still have it, of our child, of our baby being snatched by a stranger. That may be part of the aspect of the fear. So a changeling is also a way of explaining why a particular individual is nothing like his family as well, or nothing like her family. Yeah. It might also be a means of, if a child is illegitimate, of explaining why they look very different to their father or...
Okay, so they couldn't conceive at all of that.
That was the idea,
that was
yes.
The idea, okay.
Yeah. And the idea of swapping between an older realm and another realm is quite interesting.
Okay, so can fairies be classed as angels or spirits of the air?
No.
No?
There is it drives me wild. There is an idea that today that people see fairies as similar to angels. There are no angels in Celtic myth. The fairies are the old pagan people. They are the nature gods and spirits who respect nature. An angel is a product of monotheism, of the big three. Angels exist in Christianity, Islam and Judaism. In fact, they share many of their angels, and that's probably why they're all squabbling all the time. An angel is a messenger from a god. The fairies are a messenger from the world to respect the world and look after them properly.
Okay.
So there is a difference, and you could see, I suppose, leprechauns as fairies.
Yes.
You could see...
so the fact that they're angels is a Christian belief?
It's a Christian belief, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's a Christian, Jewish and Islamic belief.
Okay, alright. Yeah, that's fine.
Just as you get Jesus in all three religions, just as you get Moses and Noah in all three,
yes,
you get angels in all three. And the fairies are like you and I. They are flesh and blood according to the beliefs, yeah?
Yes, yeah.
But angels are never been born. Fairies are. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, that's fine. So it's also my understanding that fairies were between heaven and hell. This is another.
Well, this is one more to do with the Christian idea.
Between
it's a bit like this confusion. Yeah. If you've never been converted to Christianity, does that make you live in between heaven and hell? I don't know. I think it's more like that the fairies were mistaken by the church as being devils and demons. Yeah. As the Christian church grew up and replaced the older religions, all the old gods were seen as devils and demons. But that is largely a product of saying, because you don't believe in what we believe, you are therefore evil. Yeah, that's what that's about. The fairies aren't faintly interested in salvation or getting into heaven or hell, because it doesn't apply to them in literal Celtic ideas. Because the ideas would be that they live forever, or they age very slowly. Yeah, the fairies are not little pretty women in pink dresses like Tinkerbell.
The Tinkerbell, yeah.
In Peter Pan.
Yeah, the Tooth Fairy isn't
And the Tooth Fairy is not.
Yes.
They are rude, radical and very powerful, and they are seen traditionally as means of protecting the environment and nature. They are not pleasant in that sense, and I imagine I would be pretty cheesed off if the sacred groves were burnt by the priests and the old altars thrown down. I think that's where they come from, and they've been Christianised and made nice by Walt Disney.
Yes.
But I do assure you that I think perhaps Anthony Cherry would be the person to ask about nature and its guardians, and I do think they're people to be trifled with.
Okay.
There is a long tradition of fairy folk in the Celtic countries. Evans Vance, the anthropologist, wrote a book called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, and looked at that sort of idea. So the fairies do not exist between heaven and hell, and the reason they're frightened of iron is because the reasons that the Anglo-Saxons were able to defeat the Celts was because they had weapons made of iron, whereas the Celts had weapons made of bronze. Some people argue that the idea. It's a transition from the Bronze Age culture to the Iron Age culture.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And they couldn't adapt to that.
And they couldn't
that
adapt,
change.
so they faded.
I see.
The elves in Lord of the Rings have a certain fairy-like quality.
Yes.
Yeah. Guardians of the land. Yeah.
Yeah.
People are scared of them because they live in the woods. That sort of thing.
Okay, that's cool. So are fairies magical then, in a sense?
Well, yes, they are in the sense, according to the tradition, because they understand the real way that the world is. They understand that it's a series of energies, that there is a natural rhythm of the seasons, that things grow and decay. And they understand about herbs, they understand about how the world should be looked after. And they seem not to be so concerned with trade, commerce and industry. So they are magical in the sense that they see their role as living in harmony.
And of course you mentioned the Celts as well.
And the Celts were very much like that.
Yeah.
In the fairy tradition, women are equal. In old Celtic tradition, women were equal. And it's probably taken us 2,500 years to get back in the West, the idea where women are achieving near equality.
Okay, so how do you think films like Peter Pan, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Hook, A Midsummer Night's Dream and Shrek interpret the fairy myth?
Lots of things there, that's interesting. The Midsummer Night's Dream was a play written by Shakespeare to be performed at a wedding. And the fairies were very keen to hasten along love, passion and sexuality. And I think just as we have a fear, some people do. Notice how we've talked about vampires, werewolves, fairies. There's been a very constant theme of sexuality in all of it.
Yeah, there is.
And in the 19th century, lots of Victorian artists decided to paint fairies and tell stories about fairies. And there's a book called The Erotic World of Fairy. It was basically how Victorian men got their thrills.
Yes, yeah.
And the idea, and these very tastefully drawn pictures and painted pictures of fairies were always in the nude. But strangely enough, the fairies never had pubic hair, which is supposed to be, a bit shocking. And the idea of the fairy as a passionate creature, yeah. If you think of Peter Pan and Tinkerbell, Peter Pan never grows up, so he never becomes sexually mature. He never, yeah.
Yeah, that's
Tinkerbell
right,
is, yeah.
Yeah.
The adults are bad, yeah. They are threats, yeah.
Yes.
Peter Pan can never achieve a proper relationship with Wendy, because if he was to achieve growth and become a man, and Wendy was to become a woman, they would have a romantic and sexual relationship. Okay. So in a sense, the Peter Pan and story would be a freezing of people.
But I suppose it's targeted to a very young audience, isn't it? So that it probably wouldn't get that far anyway with
Well, it's not so much to do with that. It's to do with the question of denial of change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are psychological things that we could speculate about J.M. Barrie. And there's a writer of that would make it quite interesting. We could also look at the idea of C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, where the children remain children. Yeah?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And Susan cannot come back into Narnia at the later stories because she's grown up and become interested in parties and boys.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is the idea, fundamentally, what has happened is that the fairy world has been robbed of its passion and its insight.
Right.
And they are sanitised and made safe.
I see. Oh yeah, I can understand that, yeah. You mentioned earlier that fairies couldn't conceive, or they couldn't have children. It's my understanding that children were abducted by fairies. Is that the reason why?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
yeah.
And it's a bit like the idea that fairies live for a long, long time. So conception is very difficult, they can only conceive. Because they are not bound by death, that also puts them beyond the church as well. They live a long, long time and they don't need a personal salvation.
Right.
But there are certain humans who are naturally drawn into fairy circles, who want to dance and sing at May Day and on times like that.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the fairy realm is sparse, is long-living, is fundamentally different, and may refer to the old pre-Christian ideas. Notice we talk about fairy abduction. Modern day myths talk about UFO abduction.
Yes, yes.
And I wonder sometimes if the idea of fairy abduction and UFO abduction are exactly the same, but are descriptions in different time periods of the same phenomena.
Possibly. Yeah.
You know, we also have that expression, don't we? Away with the fairies. You know, meaning we are not concentrating on understanding what society is, what's going on really.
Yes, yeah.
So
your mind's elsewhere.
Yeah, your mind's elsewhere. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned earlier, well, just a few moments ago about mermaids.
Yeah.
What's the connection between mermaids and...
Mermaids are the fairies of the sea.
Okay.
They are beings that are part fish, part female. And just like the elves, like the fairies, they don't have souls, they're not rescuable by the church. I remember reading absolutely sad stories in the Brothers Grimm about the sailor who caught a mermaid by accident, and she came home with him and married him. And when she was at land, she looked like a woman, but she always yearned for the sea.
Okay. Yeah.
And she was drawn back to it because she did not belong on land. And sometimes it's a metaphor for the difference between those who are rational and those who are irrational, those who are saved and those who are not saved. A lot of the mermaid legends may also be to do with sailors who are desperately starved of female company and hallucinate, see.
Okay.
Yeah. And I noticed in some of the Pirates of the Caribbean, the mermaids were seen as very savage, very wild and aggressive.
Yes, yeah.
And mermaids are creatures that once more fulfil that role. They're not one thing or the other. They're not fish or human. They're a creature that can exist in both elements. That's pretty scary.
Frightening thought. Well, thanks very much for coming on the show again, Matt. It's been a pleasure talking to you, as always. And that's all we've got time for this evening, guys. Don't forget to tune in next week. We're not going to tell you what the subject is next week, but we're going to surprise you. Okay, well, thanks very much. Have a good evening.